In October of 2024, an engineer at Anthropic posted a little demo to a company chat channel. It was a toy, a tiny program running in a terminal that could tell him what song was playing on his laptop. It got 2 likes. Almost nobody noticed. A year later, that same little program had a name: Claude Code. It was writing around 90% of its own source code, and it was earning Anthropic more than $500 million a year. This is the story of how a toy that got 2 likes quietly became one of the most important tools in software, told by the people who were actually in the room. This is the secret history of Claude Code. To understand how it started, you have to go back years before anyone typed the words Claude Code. Back to a bet Anthropic made when it was still a tiny research lab. The bet was this: that the road to real artificial intelligence ran straight through code. Shauna Kravec, who runs reinforcement learning at the company, said it plainly. The path to transformative AI, she believed, would root through the ability to automate large chunks of software engineering. So they started early. In 2021, a research engineer named Don Drain was handed one almost absurd assignment: make a model that is as good at coding as possible. At least, in her words, as good as me. The very first product Anthropic ever shipped was a coding assistant, a humble extension for a code editor that gave you 4 suggestions for every request. Ben Mann, one of the company's co-founders, remembers that even deciding to build a product at all was controversial. This was a safety lab, not a software company. But the research kept inching forward. By 2022, Shauna's team had built the original training system for AI agents. And by 2023, they cracked something that mattered more than it looked. They gave the model a way to run real commands, to reach out and search the world around it. Ben Mann calls this one of the key pieces that make agentic coding work. A model that could not just think about code, but act. The door was open. Someone just had to walk through it. Before Claude Code, there was Clide, an internal experimental command line tool named by an engineer named Eli Tran Johnson. Dawn Drain admits she spent an embarrassingly long time just trying to teach the model to write a clean edit to a single file. Clide was the result, and it was, by everyone's account, wonky. Very, very ahead of its time is how Shauna describes it, but a few people fell quietly in love with it. Ben Mann was hacking on Clide in his spare time just because he loved it. One of the last things an engineer named Adam Wolff added to Clide was a small kind of magic. He taught it to look at a half-finished change, guess what you were trying to do, and finish it for you. It was, he says, baby agentic. And the first time it actually worked, Adam Wolff was dancing around his kitchen. He couldn't believe it. Boris Cherny, the man who would go on to lead Claude Code, said Clide was not great software, but it was magical anyway, because, he said, it saw the future. In January of 2024, Ben Mann started a new team at Anthropic called Labs. He had spotted a hole in the market. Nobody had really built an agent that could code. That September, an engineer named Boris Cherny joined that team. Boris had spent years as a principal engineer at Meta. Careful, deliberate, and when he arrived, he wanted to start small. He proposed building a linter, a modest, well-behaved little tool. Ben Mann's answer became a turning point in this whole story. No, no, no. No, 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 he told him. You have to do the big thing. So Boris was handed the vaguest, largest assignment imaginable: automate coding. Boris had already had his own conversion moment. He had written an entire pull request by hand, and his manager had rejected it. But his manager told him, actually, You should use Clyde for this. So Boris pasted the task into Clyde and watched it write the whole thing for him. He had never seen anything like it. It was shocking, he said. It felt like the future. Now, that feeling was his job. Boris started in the cheapest, humblest way he could think of. He just wanted to learn how to use Anthropic's own AI. So he built the simplest possible thing, a little program running in a terminal. The very first version was bare bones. It couldn't read your files, it couldn't run commands, it couldn't really do any engineering at all. But he wired it up to his Mac and he asked it to find out what music he was listening to. And it did. It quietly took a screenshot of his music app, read the screen, and told him the song. It's kind of magical, Boris said. It's just doing it. That took him about 2 days. To recreate it today with Claude Code would take about 2 minutes. He posted it to the company chat. He got 2, maybe 3 likes. Almost nobody understood what they were looking at, but one engineer did. Igor Kofman took one look and thought, it was obvious to me that this was the right approach. And the very next morning, Boris walked past a colleague named Robert Boyce and saw those familiar red and green lines of changing code glowing on his screen. What are you doing? Boris asked. Robert looked up. Yeah, he said. It's doing my coding. It was, Boris said, the craziest thing. It was actually useful. Then came the unlock. The single change that turned a party trick into something that felt alive. Around this time, Boris had been talking with Cat Wu, who was studying how AI agents could use a computer. And Boris did something that sounds small. He gave his little terminal program real tools, the ability to read files, to write files, to run commands on its own. And suddenly, this agent was interesting. He pointed it at Anthropic's own code base and just started asking it questions. And without being told to, the model began to explore, opening files, following the code, teaching itself the code base on its own. Boris has a phrase for what he understood in that moment. The model wants to use tools, he said. That's all it is. It was, for him, the first time he truly felt AGI. Not a model waiting for instructions, a model reaching for the world. Let's pause the timeline right here. At the exact moment this thing came alive. Because every story like this one has people who watched it happen and people who only heard about it later. This channel is where you get to watch it happen. Every week, I go inside the tools and the moments that are quietly rewriting how we build. And I hand you the real story and the playbook. So add yourself to this timeline. Subscribe and follow me on Instagram and Facebook too. Consider it your marker on the map. You were here for the secret history. Okay, back to the moment everything caught fire. What happened next did not happen because of a marketing campaign. There was no campaign. In November of 2024, roughly 2 months after that 2-like demo, the tool was finally good enough to share inside the company. And it spread like fire through dry grass. On the very first day, about 1 in 5 of Anthropic's engineers were using it. Within 5 days, it was half of them. No announcement, just word of mouth. Engineer telling engineer. Around then, a new engineer named Sid Bidasaria arrived, found the early tool, loved it, and became engineer number 2. For a while, that was the entire team. 2 people. No formal process, no long documents. Just prototype fast and let the model show you what it could do. And somewhere in here, the strangest part of the whole story began. They started using Claude Code to build Claude Code. By early 2025, it was time to show the world. The early reception was honestly lukewarm. A cool idea, people said, but full of bugs. They took the leap anyway and launched publicly in February of 2025. And that is the moment the tool got its real name. Until then, It had just been called Claude Code, short for command line. A marketer named Alex Iskin proposed something simpler, Claude Code. They liked how plain it was. And late one night before launch, Igor Kofman had a small human idea. Wouldn't it be nice, he thought, if it had its own little logo, drawn in text? So he sat with Claude, and together they designed the pixel starburst that greets you every time you open it. A tiny delight. A designer, Meaghan Choi, added a small character to the terminal named Claude, first drawn by Sam McAllister for an earlier Claude launch. You don't get to do that kind of thing in serious products very often, she said. This one had a soul. But the tool still wasn't ready to change the world. Not quite. For hard, specialized work, it was still clumsy. It was waiting on one thing, a better brain. That brain arrived in May of 2025 with the Claude 4 models. Meaghan Choi remembers the feeling exactly. Until then, she said, the model just wasn't ready for the product they wanted to build. And then it was. At the very same time, they added something far less glamorous, but just as important, subscriptions. A simple way for anyone to pay for it and use it. Boris calls this the real secret of the takeoff, a business model innovation coupled with a model innovation arriving together. And it took off. It got so good that at another company, the makers of a tool called Mann, someone actually proposed banning Claude Code. Its creator flatly refused to let that happen. And this is where our counter finally moves. The demo that got 2 likes was now writing around 90% of its own code and earning more than $500 million a year. So, where does a story like this leave the people who lived it? In a strange and honest place. Boris Cherny, the man who built it, will tell you plainly that he has not written a line of code by hand in over 6 months. And yet, he is building all day long. He doesn't think we will keep calling these people engineers. He thinks there will be 100 times more of them than there are today. And then he says the thing that should stay with you. This, he says, is the worst it is ever going to be. Shauna Kravec, the physicist, frames it as a kind of vertigo. In her old field, people chase the same hard problem for a century. Here, she says, we might see that much change in as little as 3 months. That is the disorienting part, she admits. And I'm not sure anybody is ready for it. Igor Kofman ends it where all of this really begins. His mother was a scientist who once wrote code on punch cards. As a boy, he would help her debug them by hand. His father learned to program from a single book beside a donated Commodore computer in a youth center in Kiev. From punch cards to a book beside a borrowed machine to a tool that now writes itself. That is the arc of this secret history, and it is still being written. So here is my gift to you. I put the whole story into one free field guide, the complete Claude Code origin timeline, plus a simple, honest guide to actually getting started with it yourself today. Just comment the word Genesis or grab the link in the description. And if you want to go deeper, my beginner Claude Code guide walks you through all of it, step by step. Subscribe, add yourself to the timeline, and follow along on Instagram and Facebook. Because the next chapter of this story you get to build. I'll see you there.